From the shadowy terror of Nosferatu to the seductive, tortured figure in Bram Stoker's Dracula, Count Dracula has taken many forms on screen. But have you ever wondered how a historical figure became one of horror's most iconic monsters? In this video, we're diving deep into Dracula's transformation across decades of cinema and exploring the real-life story behind the legend. After spending weeks piecing this together, I can't wait for you to join me on this journey. There's so much more to Dracula than fangs and capes. Let's uncover the truth together. I hope you enjoy every moment. Is Count Dracula a monstrous villain, or a tragic figure trapped by fate? And why do we find ourselves oddly drawn to him, despite his evil deeds? Count Dracula is portrayed as a complex character in many of the latest film adaptations, a fusion of good and evil. He does terrible things, but not simply out of malice. Often it's for love, revenge, or to protect his family, and even save his people. Stay with us as we explore the fascinating duality of this iconic figure and uncover what truly drives the Prince of Darkness. A real-life 15th century ruler in Romania, Vlad earned his terrifying nickname due to his brutal methods of punishment, often impaling his enemies on stakes. His reputation for cruelty and his castle in Transylvania sparked the imagination of Bram Stoker, who created Count Dracula, the most iconic vampire of all time. Vlad's sinister legacy, intertwined with the fear of the unknown, shaped the vampire myth as we recognize it today. But vampires existed in stories long before Dracula's shadow loomed. In ancient cultures, there were legends of blood-drinking creatures, like the Strigoi in Romania and the Lamia of Greek mythology. These early vampires were feared as supernatural beings that preyed on humans, especially at night. From classic literature to modern hits, the vampire's journey through time is as thrilling as it is chilling. Count Dracula, the iconic vampire of literature and popular culture, has his origins in the 15th century Wallachian Prince Vlad III Dracula, also known as Vlad the Impaler. While Bram Stoker's 1897 novel Dracula cemented the character's status as the archetypal vampire, the real-life Vlad Dracula's ruthless reign and bloodthirsty reputation laid the groundwork for this legendary figure. Vlad III, the son of Vlad Dracula, earned the moniker the Impaler for his favored method of execution, impalement on a sharp wooden stake. As Prince of Wallachia, he ruled with an iron fist, brutally punishing his enemies and even his own people. Vlad's cruelty was well documented, with reports of him impaling thousands of Ottoman prisoners and even inviting beggars to a sumptuous feast only to burn them alive in the hall. The name Dracula itself has its origins in Vlad's father, Vlad Dracula, who was a member of the Order of the Dragon. In Romanian, Dracul means both the dragon and the devil, contributing to the sinister reputation of the Dracula family. Vlad III signed his own letters as Dracula, cementing the name that would later inspire Stoker's famous vampire. Dracula, 1897, the novel that started all. Written by Bram Stoker, Dracula introduces Count Dracula, the ultimate vampire who leaves his creepy castle in Transylvania to terrorize London. While Stoker's Count Dracula is a vampire with supernatural abilities, the author drew inspiration from the historical Vlad the Impaler. He's the original gangster of vampires, and this gothic tale is filled with dark castles, foggy landscapes, and hypnotic powers. Though vampires existed in folklore long before Stoker's time, Dracula is one of the earliest and most influential depictions of the modern vampire. Stoker's portrayal of Dracula shaped many of the vampire tropes we recognize today, such as the ability to shapeshift, control over nocturnal creatures, and the vampire's aversion to sunlight, garlic, and holy symbols. Dracula, a vampire of immense power, thirsts for blood and immortality. He stalks his prey with a sinister grace, his presence a chilling shadow that lingers long after he has vanished. Dracula is more than just a horror story. It's a psychological exploration of fear, obsession, and the darkness that lurks within us all. Stoker's masterful storytelling, combined with the chilling atmosphere he creates, makes Dracula a timeless classic that continues to haunt readers centuries after its publication. Dracula's journey through film history is an intriguing evolution of a character who began as a figure of pure horror and gradually morphed into a far more complex icon. What makes this evolution so fascinating is how each new portrayal of Dracula not only reshapes him as a villain, but also subtly reflects changing attitudes toward fear, power, and perhaps even the darker corners of human nature. Starting with the eerie silence of Nosferatu, and ending with the tragic complexity of Bram Stoker's Dracula, we see the Count transformed over the decades in ways that are both familiar and fresh. In Nosferatu, 1922, the character, known as Count Orlok, is a creature of nightmare, all sharp angles, long fingers, and grotesque features. Orlok was less a man and more an embodiment of disease and decay, tapping into post-World War I fears of death and the unseen threats that lurked around every corner. This early version of Dracula wasn't someone you could relate to or understand. He was a walking plague, inhuman and emotionless, his sole purpose to drain life and spread terror. There was no charm, no nuance, no ambiguity, just pure, existential dread. It was a reflection of an era that had been ravaged by war and illness, where the line between life and death felt thin, and danger could strike without warning. Then came Dracula, 1931, the film that introduced the character as a suave, charming figure. Bela Lugosi's portrayal of Count Dracula was a sharp departure from the ghoulish Orlok. Here, Dracula wasn't a monstrous figure lurking in the shadows. He was a refined gentleman, dressed immaculately, speaking in a hypnotic, almost poetic tone. This was a Dracula who could walk among high society, hiding his true nature behind a veneer of sophistication. His menace lay not in grotesque appearance, but in his ability to manipulate, seduce, and control. Lugosi's Dracula could be seen as a metaphor for something more elusive, perhaps an exploration of the way people can hide darker impulses beneath a polished exterior. The film hinted that true danger might not come from obvious monsters, but from those who blend in, hiding their intentions in plain sight. Christopher Lee's portrayal in the Hammer horror films took Dracula to a new level of intensity. Lee brought an element of raw physicality to the role, making his Dracula more violent, more animalistic, and more dangerous. This version of the character was still aristocratic, but there was a ferocity in Lee's performance that added a primal energy to the Count. His Dracula wasn't content with subtlety. He was a predator in every sense of the word, unapologetically ruthless when it came to getting what he wanted. The Hammer films also leaned heavily into the erotic nature of the vampire myth, making Dracula's bite as much about desire as it was about death. This version of Dracula could be seen as a reflection of a changing society, one more open to exploring taboos and darker desires. Yet, the character retained an air of mystery. Was this a monster driven purely by instinct, or was there something more at play beneath the surface? The question lingered, never fully answered. The 1992 film adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula, directed by Francis Ford Coppola, is a cinematic masterpiece that breathes new life into the old legend, blending elements of horror, romance, and gothic spectacle. The movie doesn't just retell the classic vampire story, it revitalizes it, delving deeper into the emotional and psychological complexities of its infamous title character, Count Dracula. At its heart, the story begins in 1462 with the historical figure Vlad the Impaler, portrayed by Gary Oldman. After a successful victory against the Turkish forces, Vlad returns home to discover that his beloved wife, Elisabetta, played by Winona Ryder, has committed suicide, having been led to believe falsely that her husband died in battle. In a fit of despair and anger against the church that refuses to give her soul a proper burial, Vlad renounces God. He drives his sword into the cross, drinking the blood that flows from it, thus sealing his fate as an undead creature, Count Dracula. Fast forward to 1897, the main storyline unfolds with the young solicitor Jonathan Harker, portrayed by Keanu Reeves, traveling to Transylvania to assist Dracula with real estate matters in London. Upon arrival, Harker is greeted by the eerie and decrepit Count Dracula, now aged and monstrous, with elongated fingers and a shadow that seems to move independently. The Count is far more than just a creature of the night. He wields an eerie command over the elements, summoning storms and bending the weather to his will, cloaking the world in an ominous shroud. With a mere glance, Dracula can control the minds of the weak, twisting thoughts and desires to serve his dark purposes. His supernatural strength and mastery of his surroundings make him a force of pure dread, blurring the lines between man, monster, and nature itself. As Dracula's intentions become clearer, he leaves Harker trapped in his castle and sets sail for London. The transformation of the Count during his journey is nothing short of astounding. As he feeds on blood, he regains his youth, morphing from the elderly, ghoulish figure to a much younger, almost rock star-like version of himself. When he arrives in London, Dracula takes on the appearance of a dashing gentleman with long, flowing hair and a perfectly tailored suit, charismatic and mysterious, yet still undeniably dangerous. This version of Dracula is seductive, more romantic antihero than straightforward villain, which adds a layer of complexity to his character. The film's portrayal of Dracula as both predator and tragic lover is deeply tied to his obsession with Mina Murray, played by Winona Ryder. Speaking of Van Helsing, Anthony Hopkins' portrayal of the famous vampire hunter is one of the film's highlights. Unlike other portrayals, Hopkins plays him with a manic energy, a man both brilliant and a little unhinged. He's a scientist and a mystic, fully aware of the danger Dracula represents, yet he approaches the task of hunting vampires with almost a gleeful excitement. The movie's visuals are another aspect that sets it apart from other adaptations. Coppola's decision to use practical effects, rather than relying on the use of computer graphics, gives the film a timeless quality. Shadows creep and elongate unnaturally, rats scurry across the ceiling, and Dracula transforms into various monstrous forms: wolf, bat, mist, all through old-school filmmaking techniques. There's a tactile sense to the horror, a richness in the imagery that grounds even the most fantastical moments in reality. The use of vivid reds, deep blacks, and gothic architecture creates a visual feast that complements the operatic scale of the story. Each scene feels meticulously crafted, like a painting brought to life. One of the movie's most intriguing aspects is how it reimagines the figure of Dracula himself. Here, he is not just a monster to be vanquished, but a deeply tragic figure. His immortality is both his curse and his punishment, his longing for his lost love driving him to commit horrific acts. Gary Oldman brings a vulnerability to Dracula that had not been seen before, making him a sympathetic character even as he drinks the blood of innocence. It's this duality, the monster and the man, that makes his character so compelling. Unlike other versions where the vampire is simply a villain to be defeated, Coppola's Dracula ends on a note of melancholy. The love story comes full circle, and in his final moments, the Count finds redemption. It's a bittersweet ending, one that lingers with the viewer long after the credits roll. Ultimately, Bram Stoker's Dracula is more than just a horror movie. It's a gothic romance, a meditation on love, loss, and the nature of evil. But it's the 1992 film that lingers longer in the mind, thanks to its rich performances, gothic atmosphere, and timeless story of love and loss. Today, Vlad the Impaler remains a controversial figure in Romanian history, with some seeing him as a patriotic hero, while others are ashamed of his brutal legacy. However, his impact on literature and popular culture is undeniable. Count Dracula has become one of the most recognizable and enduring characters in fiction, spawning countless adaptations and inspiring the vampire genre as a whole. The prototype of the vampire, Dracula, may have been a ruthless 15th century prince, but his legacy lives on in the immortal Count. As Dracula's cinematic journey unfolded, it's interesting to see how each portrayal highlighted different aspects of the character. Throughout these changes, one thing remains constant. Dracula is always more than just a monster. He represents something hidden, something that may or may not exist in everyone. In each of his forms, there's a suggestion of a shadow self, a darker side that may only come out under the right circumstances. Whether it's the predator that hides behind sophistication or the sorrowful figure seeking redemption through destruction, Dracula is a reflection of the complexities within us all. But how much of this darkness is a part of human nature, and how much of it is pure fantasy is left for each viewer to decide. Dracula's evolution on screen mirrors the changing fears, desires, and cultural norms of each era. From the grotesque figure of Nosferatu to the tragic anti-hero of Coppola's Dracula, the character has remained an enduring symbol of horror. Yet as he evolves, he also reminds us that the line between monster and man is never entirely clear. Whether we view him as an external threat or a reflection of something internal, Dracula continues to captivate, his shadow always lingering, just out of reach.